So the disqualification clause is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And what it says is that no one can be an officer of the United States if they had previously taken an oath of office and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. And so this is a provision that was put into the 14th Amendment immediately following the Civil War in an effort to prevent former US officials who had defected and joined the Confederacy from coming back and taking office once again because they had been disloyal to the country and they had violated that oath. Yeah, so in the wake of the Civil War, there were a handful of enforcement actions. Sometimes it was through the district attorney would bring a case to disqualify someone. There were a couple instances where Congress refused to seat someone who had been elected because Congress deemed them to be disqualified under this provision. But most people in that era that would have been disqualified knew that they were disqualified. And so what they tried to do was invoke the last sentence of the disqualification clause says that Congress by a 2/3 vote can relieve anyone of their ineligibility under this clause. And so there were lots of people who petitioned Congress to do that for them. So currently there are several places where the clause is being litigated. There were a couple of cases in the immediate wake of January 6th, including one in New Mexico against a state official that actually succeeded in getting him disqualified. There are several challenges to members of Congress who were involved in challenging the electoral vote on January 6th. But of course, the most important cases are the ones that have been brought challenging President Trump's eligibility to be on the ballot. And those suits are being brought in, I think, about 33 states. And a couple of them have determined that he is, in fact, ineligible. The Secretary of State in Maine said he was ineligible to be on the ballot, and the Supreme Court of Colorado reached that same conclusion. And the Supreme Court just decided that it would, in fact, hear President Trump's appeal from that Colorado Supreme Court opinion. So soon we will know more about what the Supreme Court thinks. Well, a lot of it's going to depend on what the Supreme Court has to say, of course. It's actually quite unpredictable in ways that might be surprising because when you read the clause, it says, if you held office and you engaged in rebellion, you're not eligible to hold office. Again, it seems relatively simple. But when you dig down into it, there are actually numerous difficult legal questions that have never been brought up before, and therefore we don't know the answers. So questions like, is this provision automatically enforceable, or does Congress need to pass some form of legislation to implement it? Is the president an officer of the United States? Which may sound like a silly question, but there are some contexts in which the presidency is deemed to be part of the, quote, offices of the United States, and other contexts where it's not. So there's controversy about that. There is no definition of what constitutes a rebellion or an insurrection. And so what does it mean to engage in rebellion or insurrection, and did January 6th qualify? And if it did President Trump's actions in the wake of the 2020 election leading up to and on January 6th, did his actions qualify as engaging in an insurrection or a rebellion? So there's all these questions about what the clause actually means. And then there's also questions about who should be making those decisions, because ballot access decisions and rules are typically part of state election law. They're not federally controlled. And so it's possible to say, well, each of the 50 states has their own process, and therefore in some states the Secretary of State will decide, in some states the courts will decide, and that could create a big patchwork mess. And so I think a lot of people are hoping that the Supreme Court will provide some answer that gives us some uniform rule that's going to apply across the country so we can resolve the question before we get really into the heart of election season.